This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good morning, Rabbi Glatstein. Bruchim abam to the Kollel Agar de Pirka. May today's learning be Lezecher Nishmas Hensha Bas Shalom, mother of our dear friend Rav Gary Esterson. On this occasion, and may her neshama have an aliyah. Should be a Melitza Yishara for Hom Mishpacha. I know a lot of the Einiklach. I know they're Marbitzei Torah across the America, so they should be B'siyata D'Shmaya, and she should be Melitza Yishara for all the children and grandchildren of B'yas Goel Tzedek. Okay, the Rambam says regarding the Daled Tanesim, specifically when it comes to Asara B'Teves, which of course is tomorrow, the Rambam tells us what happened on Asara B'Teves. V'asiri B'Teves, on the 10th day of Teves, Shevay Samach Melech Bavel Nebuchadnezzar Harasha Al Yerushalayim. Nebuchadnezzar, the wicked, set siege, surrounded Yerushalayim, V'hevia b'matzar v'matzaik, and he brought it to siege and distress. It's the day Nebuchadnezzar surrounded the walls of Jerusalem, during which Beis HaMikdash? The first Beis HaMikdash. We'll be okay. Yeah, during the times of the first Beis HaMikdash. Okay, that's what the Rambam tells us. So for many years, I was bothered by the following question. It's even a question I sent to Reb Chaim Kanievsky, and that's as follows. Why do we commemorate the day that Nebuchadnezzar set siege to the walls of Yerushalayim in the times of the first Beis HaMikdash? We know that throughout our calendar we have four major Tanesim. Tzayim HaRavi, Tzayim HaChamishi, Tzayim HaShvi, V'Tzayim HaAsiri. Tzayim HaRavi is what? Tzayim Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz. Shiva Asar Tammuz. That's when the walls were breached. Then Tzayim HaChamishi, that's when the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. Then Tzayim HaShvi is when the final coal, the last ember, was extinguished with the hope of Gedaliah. And then Tzayim HaAsiri is Asar B'Teves. The truth is, Asar B'Teves is the beginning. We really shouldn't start Tzayim HaRavi. We only start Tzayim HaRavi because it comes up first in the year, but in the course, in the sequence of the tragedies, first comes Asar B'Teves. That's when the wall was surrounded. Then Tammuz, that's when the walls were broken. Then Av, that's when the temple was destroyed. And then in Tishrei, our last governor in Yerushalayim, who was the last ray of hope, he was assassinated on Tzayim Gedaliah. So the question is, let's get a little bit more precise. What exactly happened in Tammuz? So we fast on the 17th day of Tammuz because that's the day that the walls were breached. During which Beis HaMikdash? Second Beis HaMikdash. During the time of the first Beis HaMikdash, the Navi says they were breached on the 9th. So why in the world do we fast the 17th, which is the day the walls were breached in the time of the second Beis HaMikdash? We should fast the 9th, the day the prophet says the walls were breached in the time of the first Beis HaMikdash. In fact, there's actually a machlokes Bavli and the Yerushalmi. The Bavli says that, in fact, in the times of the first Beis HaMikdash, it was breached on the 9th. The Yerushalmi says in the times of the first Beis HaMikdash, it was breached on the 17th as well. The Navi says the 9th. The Yerushalmi says the Navi was wrong. How could you say the Navi was wrong? The Navi is getting communication from God. So the Tosfos in Masechta Rosh Hashanah explains the Yerushalmi that even though the pasuk says the 9th, there was such confusion, there was such bahala, there was such a tumult, there was such a tumultuous time of disaster that people really did not know what day it was. People could not keep track of the date. And in order to preserve the terrible catastrophe and tumult of the time, the Navi wrote the 9th. That's the day they thought it was. The Navi knew it was the 17th, but the Navi, in order to preserve the confusion of the time, wrote the 9th. However,
Navi didn't write his...
What?
Navi didn't write his divorce. Somebody wrote them. So what he said, he didn't...
The Navi L'chaira wrote them. I mean, we're talking about here, the Navi Yirmiyah. Who wrote Sefer Yirmiyah? Let's see. What does Gemara Bava Basra say? Is there a Bava Basra? If there's an art school, it's in one. Yeah. So, but be it as it may, the opinion of the Bavli was in the time of the first Beis HaMikdash, they breached the walls on the 9th. right? In the times of the second, so we're going to go with the Babli for a moment. The Babli says in the times of the first Beis HaMikdash, they breached the walls on the 9th. In the times of the second Beis HaMikdash, they breached the walls on the 17th. So Tosfos asks, so why do we fast the 17th? Which is later, we should fast the 9th, which is recorded in the Navi. So Tosfos basically says, look at number 3. Hainu zet tisha betamos shabai hufka ha'ir. Hainu berishoina avo b'shniya hufka b'yud zayin. Umisham hachi avdinam b'yud zayin tainus. That's why we make the fast on the 17th based on the second Beis HaMikdash. Now, the Tosfos doesn't really explain why would we fast the 17th and not the 9th. So for that, you have to look in the Mechaber in number 2, Siman Tav Kuf Mem Tes of Beis. Says Tosfos, it says the Mechaber, says the Shulchan Aruch, Afal Gav the Chsiv B'Kra B'Chodesh Haravi B'Tisha L'Chodesh Hufka Ha'ir. Even though the pasuk says on the 4th month, on the 9th day of the month, the city was breached. Ein misanin betesbai ela b'yud zayin. Why? V'nei sha'af al pisha b'rishon of betes kivan sheb'shni of b'yud zayin tignos an b'yud zayin mishum dechorben b'yashemi chamor lan. The tragedy, the severity of the second Beis HaMikdash is more severe than the first Beis HaMikdash. So even though on the first Beis HaMikdash the walls were breached on the 9th, the second Beis HaMikdash was breached on the 17th. So you'll say fast both. You can't fast both. You can't be matriach people so much. So if you have to pick one date, we prefer to pick the date which is more chamor, and that is the date that commemorates the breaching of the walls of Yerushalayim in the times of the second Beis HaMikdash. So I was therefore bothered for a long time with the following question. If when it comes to the breaching of the walls, we don't commemorate the day the walls were breached the first time around, but rather we commemorate the time that the walls were breached the second time around, because Churban Bayesheni Chamerlan, then why when it comes to setting siege to Yerushalayim, the day that they surrounded the walls, do we commemorate when they surrounded the walls in the times of the first Beis HaMikdash, namely the 10th day of Teves, right, which is Tzom HaAsiri? We should commemorate the day that they surrounded the walls in the times of the second Beis HaMikdash. Why, when the breaching, do we go by the second, and by the surrounding, we go by the first? So exactly, that's the point. By Tisha B'Av, the Mishnah says, Chamisha Tzaros Nichbelu B'Tisha B'Av. By Yis Rishon, by Yis Sheni. But by Asara B'Teves.
That's the answer. The answer is that since the ultimate song is Tisha B'Av, because of the destruction of both Batei Mikdash,
Yeah.
the beginning of the entire process was the first step in the first Beis Mikdash, and that's Asara B'Teves.
The beginning of, but why by the breaching do we commemorate the second? We should commemorate the first. Meaning?
The answer should be on that. That's the question. This makes more sense.
Okay, so it's a miman of shach. It's a miman of shach. In other words, what's more chamor, bayis rishon or bayis sheni? You want to say bayis rishon because that's what started it off. So if it's haskala, then you should commemorate the 9th of Tammuz. That's the haskala of the breaching of the first Beis HaMikdash. Yeah.
I think that he's saying that it's just sandwiching from the very beginning of the first, from the first to the.
So you want to say that we're going to look at Koirech by the Haggadah, and we see the Chachamim like sandwiches. So therefore, the way they enact Takanos is like a sandwich. Could be we could try to delve a little bit more deep into the topic, right? No, I get it. You want to say we do the beginning and the end. The end, we do second Beis HaMikdash is the breaching by the second, and by the surrounding we go by the first. By the way, friends, I'll ask you, here we have this big kasha, why don't we commemorate when they surrounded Yerushalayim by Yesheni? Does anybody know what date, in fact, did they surround Yerushalayim in times of second Beis HaMikdash? Anybody have that date on hand?
No.
No? Did you get like one of these calendars, Yortzeit calendars, Yated? Did you see in the Yated this week? What date did they surround Yerushalayim in times of the second Beis HaMikdash? Why don't we know that date? Taka, what is the date? What's the date? Why doesn't anybody say it? That's also part of the question.
No, the beginning of the destruction is when Aristobulus and Orchanes brought the Romans to begin with. So that's the beginning of the destruction.
So really, it wasn't the siege. It was even when they let the Romans in.
Exactly.
So when was that?
We don't know, but this is the real beginning.
Okay. But then you could say by the first Beis HaMikdash, it's when Shlomo married Bas Paroi. The Gemara says that they stuck the reed into the sea. What day? What was the chasana day? Let's get the invitation, So I was very pleased to find that in the Shas HaTshuvas Tashbeitz of Rav Shimon Duran. Rav Shimon Duran was born in Spain in 1361, and he was nifter in North Africa 1444. He was a descendant of the Ramban. And in 1391, he fled Algiers, and he fled to Algiers from Spain. We know in 1391 there was a mass conversion in Spain. Everybody knows 1492. But 1391, hundreds of thousands of Jews were forcibly baptized. It was the first forced conversion in our history. Now, some interesting shittos of the Tashbeitz. There's a big machlokes between the Tashbeitz and other Rishonim, namely the Rivash. So when the Tashbeitz arrives in Algiers, he was received by the Rivash. The Rivash received him very warmly, but they had a disagreement about the following issue: whether the Rabbanos should get the support of the government, whether they should have an officially recognized Rabbanos from the government. And the Rivash says, we'll give stronger standing to the Rabbanos. And the Tashbeitz did not want the Rabbanos to be governmentally backed. Okay, you can imagine what the dangers were. Another machlokes that the Tashbeitz had was with the Rambam. The Rambam held that a rabbi is not allowed to take a salary. That was the shit of the Rambam. They're not allowed to get paid for teaching Torah. However, the Tashbeitz disagreed, and Tashbeitz, for many reasons, said that a rabbi is allowed to take a salary, and he was one of the first to personally take a salary. And Tavai Alecha Bracha, Tavai Alef Bracha, for all Rabbanim later, that's all thanks to really the Tashbeitz, who realized that times were changing, and Imein Kemach Ein Torah, basically. But the Tashbeitz asked this question. He asked as an Amiman of Shach in Chelik Beisim and Reish Ayin Aleph. Look at number 4. Ha'echad Lama Ein Mesanin B'Tisha B'Tammuz B'Mnei Shabai Huvka Ha'ir Barishayna. Why do we not fast on the 9th day of Tammuz, the day that the in other words, why don't we fast on the 9th day of Tammuz, the day that the walls were breached in times of the first Beis HaMikdash? The same way when it comes to the surrounding of the walls, we commemorate the day the walls were surrounded by Bayis Rishon, we should commemorate the day the walls were breached by Bayis Rishon. V'oid, like he asked it both ways, He asked it both ways. V'oid, lama anu mesanim b'shemasa b'Tammuz. Why do we fast on the 17th, the day the walls were breached by Bayis Sheni? Ve'ein anus mesanin al smichas romiyim b'Yushalayim b'shniya. We don't fast the day that the Romans surrounded Yerushalayim during the times of the second Beis HaMikdash. In other words, pick your poison. Which Beis HaMikdash is more chamar? Bayis Rishon? Then we should fast when the walls were breached on the Bayis Rishon, the 9th of Tammuz. Bayis Sheni, then we should fast when the walls were breached by when Yerushalayim was surrounded by Bayis Sheni.
Well, we don't know that day, right? You said we don't know that day. So how are we going to...
No, I asked you,
If we don't know the date, we're going to have...
I'll find out the date. We know every other thing that happened. Find out the date. Okay. That's question number 1. Question number 2. The famous Avudraham, right? You can't talk about Asara B'Teves without mentioning the opinion of the Avudraham, Reb David Avudraham. I remember about 8 years ago, so giving Shiur in Young Israel of Kew Garden Hills. So at the Shiur was a man in the neighborhood, but you probably remember him. Reb David Tusk, remember? He lived over here. So we were learning, and we were quoting we were reading a Beis Yosef, and he quoted Reish Dalet Aleph. And I didn't know what that was. Reish Dalet Aleph. I didn't know what Reish Dalet Aleph. And he called out, Reb David Avudraham. I said, how do you know that? He said, I'm on my 3rd cycle of the tour. Apparently he's on. So anyway, we'll mention him l'toiva. Anyway, the Avudraham writes a famous klal, a famous rule, which by the way everybody knows, but people don't know. We don't really paskin that way. But he says, Sha'arbas hatzoymes heim nidchim lefamim. 4 tanesim are sometimes pushed off k'shechala b'Shabbos. In other words, the 4 tanesim are pushed off when they come out on Shabbos. Chutz me Asara B'Teves, except for Asara B'Teves. She'eino ichal lo'olam b'Shabbos. It doesn't come out on Shabbos. According to our calendar, it doesn't come out on Shabbos. Sometimes it could come out on Friday, right? It's the only time it come out on Friday. We all remember cases of going into Shabbos on Asar B'Teves. And we'll fast on Friday Asar B'Teves. And even if it would fall out on a Shabbos, we couldn't push it off. By the way, I just saw last night, I'm not going to tell you the answer, you're going to have to check it out on Torah Anytime. The Kasha, the Munkach, I saw last night in the Sefer Shah Yisaschar, he asks, why is Avudraham busy trying to figure out what would happen if Asar B'Teves would come out on Shabbos? When was the last time Asar B'Teves came out on Shabbos? It never happened. It never happened. Because the calendar was made in the times of the Gemara. Maybe pre-Gemara, the Asar B'Teves came out. But for the last 2,000 years, it didn't happen. Why is the Avudraham even discussing what would be if it came out on Shabbos? It's not Nogeya. It's not, Mashiach comes, they're going to be Yamim Tovim. Right? Elamai, he wants to know when we're going to celebrate. But then it's Parsha, you could celebrate on Shabbos. So why is he even busy with this? Why does he discuss it? It's not a what? Yeah, the Avudraham, it's not like all. It's a halacha l'maisa sefer. Why is he busy? Anyway, maybe I'll give a little clip on that. It's an interesting question. I never realized. Like everyone's busy. Every Asar B'Teves, everyone's busy with the Avudraham, who says something that's b'chlal not nogeya. But anyway, he says, we'll see, it is nageh to understanding the lamdos. Even if it would come out on Shabbos, we couldn't push it off. Why? The Navi Yecheskel says about Asar B'Teves, Be'etzem Hayoim Hazeh, on that very day, Kamay B'Yom HaKippurim, like on Yom Kippur. Now, Pashup Shan Avudraham is just like on Yom Kippur, it says Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh, we know we fast on Yom Kippur that comes out on Shabbos. So too, by Asar B'Teves, it says that Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh, if it would come out on Shabbos, we would fast. Just want to point out, we don't paskin like that Avudraham even. Rashi says, Imchal liyos b'Shabbos, Rashi Megillah Daf Hey. If a fast comes out on Shabbos, ma'achron liyay machar, we push it off. V'chein Tisha B'Av shechal liyos b'Shabbos. V'adin liyud zayin b'Tammuz. Ula Asara B'Teves. It's not so well known. Rashi writes b'Feirosh. If Asara B'Teves would come out on Shabbos, we would push it off. The Rambam also disagrees. The Rambam says, Echad me'arba yimei atzam shechal liyos b'Shabbos doichin. Any of them. So the Avudraham, first of all, it's theoretical, and second of all, it's not even the halacha. Comes Maran Bet Yosef in Ar Chaim Simon Tov Kuf Nun. He says, "V'Rab David Avudraham kasav b'Hilchos Tainis she'asara b'Teves hu meshuna mishar taniyos shem hayachal b'Shabbos lo hayachayim l'chaysa liyayim acher." Now, I would say, what's Pashup Shan Avudraham? I don't know. It sounds like he's making Gzeira Shava. It says Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh by Yom Kippur. It says Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh by Asar B'Teves. Mal Yom Kippur, you fast even on Shabbos. So too on Asar B'Teves, you would fast on Shabbos. Comes the Beis Yosef and he asks 5 words. 5. He says V'loi Yadati Minayin Loizah. In other words, in French, I don't know what the man is talking about. What? First of all, Avudraham was a very great man, but he's not a Tana. You can't make Gzeir Shavas. Rishonim can't make Gzeir Shavas. If the Rambam would say, I think the halacha is like this. It says, Vaydaber Hashem al Moshe Leimar by Mitzayra, and it says, Vaydaber Hashem al Moshe Leimar by Sukkah. So from here we learn that you have to put all the Mitzayraim into a Sukkah. That's it. Then, we reject that. You could be a Risha and you can't make a Gzeir Shava. I'll tell you another Chiddush. A Goyin can't make a Gzeir Shava. And a Moira has to have a Messiah to make a Gzeir Shava. The Avudraham is making Gzeir Shava? From Chumash to Navi? And even from Chumash to Chumash, you can't make a Gzeir Shava. What's he talking about? It says Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh on Yom Kippur. It says Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh on Tisha B'Av, on Asar B'Teves. Very nice, but you can't learn halachas one to the other. So what does the Avudraham mean that since it says Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh regarding Asar B'Teves, we'd fast even if Asar B'Teves would come out on Shabbos? Question number 3. Question. It comes the end of Shabbos, and all of a sudden, people, they can't eat anything. Can't eat the whole lunch. They're stuffing it in. They're stuffing it in. They're stuffing it in. Comes the end of Shabbos. I don't know. I once heard somebody say you could be yotzei shal shudas with Torah. I once heard somebody say you could eat mezainos. I once heard you could be yotzei shal shudas with fruit. All of this nishka shtoigen, nishka floigen. You're not yotzei. I'm going to tell you halacha. The Shulchan Aruch writes that if you don't wash, you're not yotzei shal shudas. Really? Where? Yeah, just open up the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch brings different opinions. Some say mezainos. Some say peiros, and then the Shulchan Aruch says viha ikar, that you have to wash. Says the Mishnah Berurah. That means as follows. Mishnah Berurah says even the opinion that says mezainos and fruit agrees it's better to wash. So what does the mechaber mean that the ikar is you have to wash? Says the Mishnah Berurah, what the mechaber means is that unless you're stuffed to the gills, if you don't wash, you're not yotzei. Just read the Shulchan Aruch, okay? Fine. What's the reason why people have such a hard time washing? Because since it's so important to wash, the Yetzer Hara exerts a lot of energy to make sure a Yid is not Mekayim Shal Shudas. Because the Gemara says, Kol ha'oichal Shal Shudas b'Shabbos, Nitzal migimel Paranios, Midino Shal Gehenim, Mimechemes Goy Gumagog, Umiyadin Hagadol. You hear the three big things that people worry about. The three big tragedies in the universe, if you eat the 3 meals on Shabbos, you're saved from. Friends, la'asad lavai, when there's a line to Gehenna, yeah? You want to be able to flash the card, I wash, okay? Don't start looking. If you're going to say, I ate mezainos, you want that malach to start opening up the Shulchan Aruch with the Mishnah Berurah. Yeah, but it's not, I mean, you're not yotzei. No, I was so full. Let's go to the videotape. Let's see how full you are. I'm telling you, you don't want to deal with it. You want to flash the card. You're good, and you avoid it. Just Eitzah Tova, no extra charge. Is my only personal advice. There's a mitzvah to eat on Shabbos 3 meals. Is it d'oraisa or is it Rabbanan? 3 meals on Shabbos, d'oraisa or d'Rabbanan? The real answer should be none of the above. There is a shita that's d'oraisa, hayom, but we don't paskin that way. How do we paskin? It's not d'Rabbanan either. It's midivrei neviim. Oineg Shabbos is midivrei neviim. Which Navi? Yeshaya. The Navi Yeshaya says v'karasa l'Shabbos oineg. Yeshaya says you got to eat on Shabbos. What's the halacha if Tisha B'Av comes out on Shabbos? You push it off. Who says to fast on Tisha B'Av? Who says to fast on Tisha B'Av?
Nobody.
No, who says to fast on Tisha B'Av?
The Navi.
The Navi. Which Navi?
No. It's
Zechariah. Where does Zechariah say to fast? Zechariah says Tzayim Haraviv, Tzayim HaChamishi, Chachamishi. So, okay. So now I have a question. I have this great dilemma. We know that if Tisha B'Av comes out on Shabbos, we push it off. Why? Because how could you fast on Shabbos? Yeshaya says you have to eat on Shabbos. So why doesn't Zechariah say, and who am I? I'm not a Navi. I'm chopped liver, Zechariah should say. Why is Yeshaya beating Zechariah? Who's greater, Yeshaya or Zechariah? I don't know. They're both pretty good. They're both pretty, they're heavyweights. So ask the Minchas Chinuch. Yeshaya and Zechariah should go into a ring. Yeshaya says, eat on Shabbos. Then Yeshaya says to eat even on Tisha B'Av. He says you got to eat on Shabbos. Zechariah says, you're not going to eat on Shabbos Tisha B'Av because v'tzayim HaChamishi. What should you do then, says the Minchas Chinuch, if you have a fight between 2 Nevi'im? The Navi Yeshaya says to eat, the Navi Zechariah says not to eat. What should you do?
He must eat except for Shabbos.
Did Yeshaya say, eat on Shabbos except, he didn't make exceptions. So Yeshaya says to eat, Zechariah says not to eat. What do you do when there's a match between 2 Nevi'im? Teiku. What do you, get out of the way? Right? You get out of the way, stay out of the ring. Exactly. What do you do whenever there's, what's the best thing to do when you have a machlokes between 2 great opinions? Shev v'al tasa adaf. Don't do anything. Don't act. So Yeshaya says eat. Zechariah says don't eat. Shev al tasa. Shev al tasa says don't eat. So frek the minchas chinuch. If Tisha B'av comes out on Shabbos, why do we have to push off Tisha B'av to Sunday? We should not eat because the Yeshaya says eat, Zechariah says don't eat, Shev al tasa adif, don't eat. Why push it off? Don't eat.
That's not Shev al tasa.
Yes, it is. Not eating. When I go like this, I lay back in your chair and don't eat. I'm not actively violating anything.
But you're making a choice between...
But I'm making a passive choice. And I'm allowed to, if I don't know what to do, like the Chavetz Chaim writes, sometimes a person's in a situation. Should I say the Lashon Hara, l'toyeles? But maybe it's not l'toyeles. I don't know what to do. So Chavetz Chaim says a rule. If you're not sure whether you should say it or not, it could be you have to, it could be you're not allowed to. Shev al taseh. The answer is you don't do it. Meaning, because Chavetz Chaim says, when you get upstairs, if you did it and you were wrong, Hashem's going to say, why did you do it? You weren't sure if you could do it or not. But if you should have done it and you didn't do it, and Hashem says, why didn't you do it? You say, I didn't know what to do, so I Shev al taseh. That's a good excuse. That's a kasha the minchas chinuch. Why, when a fast comes out on Shabbos, do we push it off? Fast! Shev al taseh. Question number 4. We learned from Tosfos that in the times of the first Beis HaMikdash, when did they breach the walls of Yerushalayim? On the 9th of Tammuz. And in the times of the second Beis HaMikdash, when did they breach the walls? And what do we fast? 17th. How in the world can we fast the 17th? Who legislated fasting on Tammuz in the 9th because the walls were breached? Who legislated it? Who legislated the fast of Tammuz? Zechariah. Who decided to change it to the 17th? Later rabbis. I'm all for the rabbis, but the rabbis are not as great as the Nevi'im. So if once the Navi Zechariah says to fast because the walls were breached on the 9th, how could the rabbis later on and come along and change the date? You can't argue on a Navi. Can't argue on the Navi.
Because all he said is to fast in a month.
Who said that? No. Who says that? Some Rishonim say he said the day. So then it's a kasha. Next question. Next question.
He told us this last year.
Next question. No, I didn't. Next question. Rabbi Yochanan says that if I would have been there, right, it's a Gemara at the end of Masechta Tainis and Daf Chav Tes. The Gemara says that Rabbi Yochanan says, "Emalei hayisi ba'isei hadar." If I was around when Tisha B'av was legislated, I would have made Tisha B'av on what day of the month? I would have made it on the 10th. Why? Because the majority of the Heichal burnt down on the 10th. So, right, we know they set fire to the Beis HaMikdash on the end of the day on the 9th, right? The 9th of Av, when we go to shul and we sit on the floor, what happened then? Nothing. And then, in the morning of the 9th, when we go to shul and we say kinnis, what happened then? Nothing. And then, Chatzos Hayom, when everyone gets up and they go watch movies, what happened then? Nothing happened then. And the end of the day, when everyone's getting up, that's when the Beis HaMikdash began to be burnt down. So Rabbi Yochanan said, what's the chachma of fasting on a day that nothing happened? Fast on the 10th when everything happened. So the Gemara says in Taka and the Rabbanan, why the Rabbanan say we fast on the 9th? Aschalta de paranusa adifa. The beginning of the punishment is worse. So Rabbi Yochanan says, but if I would have been around, I would have made it on the 10th. That's a good question. Rabbi Yochanan, you're a great man. Rabbi Yochanan, if you would look at, Rabbi Yochanan gave someone a look, they would disintegrate on the spot. Rabbi Yochanan could go into the cemetery and summon everyone up. But one thing, Rabbi Yochanan, if you were around when they legislated Tisha B'av, we would not have asked your opinion. Actually, we wouldn't have cared what you would have said, because the Navi was the one who said to fast on the 9th. So if I was around, I would have made it on the 10th. Excuse me, nobody asked your opinion. What do you mean if you were around? You're not a Navi. Hashem told the Navi to make it on the 9th. So Rabbi Yochanan is saying, if I was around, I would have been on the 10th. There's a chutzpah hazoya atzuma. What do you mean if you were around? Now imagine somebody said, if I was around the time of Moshe, I would have made it a longer weekend. I would have made 2-day Shabbos. I would have made Sunday. It's Reform Judaism. What does Rabbi Yochanan mean? How do we understand the words of Rabbi Yochanan?
It says the Rabbanan. His opponents are the Rabbanan, not the Navi.
No, the Rabbanan who argue on him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was around at the time of the end of the base of Mikdash. He was there.
Rabbi Yochanan?
He was in Yavin.
No. Sorry, pal.
Wrong
Ra-
Rabbi Yochanan?
Rabbi Yo-
Wrong Rabbi Yochanan.
Rabbi Yochanan here is yeah. Rabbi Yochanan was not around in the time of the Nevi'im.
Rabbi Yochanan is the Talmud of Rebbe.
Yeah, Rabbi Yochanan's not around.
Yes, Rabbi Yochanan.
Okay, so what does it mean that Rabbi Yochanan is saying if I would have been around, I would have made it on the 10th. Weiter. Next question. Question number 6. What happened in the month of Teves? So we know, everybody knows, the 10th day of Teves is the day that they surrounded the walls in the times of the Bayis Rishon, right? No, not everybody agrees to that. The Brisa says in Rosh Hashanah in Yud Ches Beis, the Brisa says, look at number 13, Soim Ha'asiri, Ze Asara b'Teves, Shebai Samach Melech Bavel Al Yushalayim. On the 10th day of Teves, the king of Bavel surrounded the walls of Yerushalayim. Shenemar Vahid Dvar Hashem Elad B'Shana Tzius V'Chodesh Siri B'Asar Chodesh Neymar Ben Adam K'Sav L'Chad Shem Hayem Hazeh Sazim Hazem Somel Bavel. Okay. Says Rabbi Akiva, Va'ani Eini Omer Kain. I don't say this. Excuse me, this is Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon Bar Yochai says, I don't agree. Soim Ha'asiri. Remember we had a question that the Tanaisim are not in order. First is Tammuz, was when they breached. Then is Av when they destroyed. Then is Tishrei when Gedaliah was assassinated. And then Teves, that's when they surrounded it to begin with. So it's not in order. So Shimon Bar Yochai says, let me tell you what happened on the 5th day of Teves. That's when the Golos found out about the destruction of Yerushalayim and the Beis HaMikdash. On what day in Teves? On the 5th day in Teves. There's actually a machloikis between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. What happened in Teves? Rabbi Akiva says it's the 10th day of Teves, the day they surrounded the walls in the times of the first Beis HaMikdash. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says it's the 5th day of Teves. That's the day that the news was spread to the Golos that Yerushalayim was destroyed. So comes the Minchas Chinuch, and the Minchas Chinuch asks, I don't understand. Both Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai lived at the time of the destruction. So why didn't, and they, I'm sure, subscribe to the Ezra's Torah Luach. I'm sure they gave $18 a year to Ezra's Torah to support Talmidei Chachamim, and they got in the mail a calendar. So why didn't they just look at the calendar and figure out what day the people were fasting? How in the world could Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shimon argue what the fast day in Teves was? Look, Pok Chazi, Ma'amad Daber. Go look what people are fasting. How can you argue about something that was taking place in their generation? Look in the Minchas Chinuch. He says, "Umay pligi Pok Chazi, Ma'amad Daber. Ma hayu oisen, ma yisheni does hayu sasin b'simcha be'ezay yom hayu oisen." Now the truth is, they lived when the second Beis HaMikdash was standing. So if they lived when the second Beis HaMikdash was standing, does anybody know when the second Beis HaMikdash was standing, what did they do on the 4 Tanaisim? They celebrated, right? It says, Soimhar, the Navi Zechariah says, Soimhar Aviv, Soimhar Chamiz, Soimhar Shuvah, Yeh L'Beis Yehuda, Sasoinu L'Simcha. That when the Beis HaMikdash was built, these were happy days. So Rabbi Akiva, what are you saying? They fasted on the 10th, while when you're alive, when did they celebrate? If they celebrated on the 5th, then clearly they didn't fast on the 10th. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, how could you say they fasted on the 5th? If they celebrated on the 10th, they clearly didn't fast on the 5th.
It's hard to say in fast.
Many examples where that door, you were there. What did they do?
You can ask that question every time.
They said they
But
forgot. They didn't remember.
no, the question is right now. The Navi says that in times of the second Beis HaMikdash, the Tanaisim were Yomim Tovim. So just see what day they celebrated, and then you'll know which day used to be a fast. You're saying they didn't know, people didn't know? People forgot? But the Navi says that they celebrated during that month, so figure out what day it was.
So it took them a year to
What?
get the small from Yerushalayim to Babel.
Yeah.
So again, it took from Av
5 months.
to Teves. Yeah, the Wi-Fi was a little hazy then.
They had to use DSL.
Marv Rabbi Sai, so the answer to all these 6 questions, as this gentleman was trying to contain himself unsuccessfully, was the Yesod that the Minchas Chinuch teaches us, and it's a yesod that's found in the Rishonim, but not all the Rishonim agree to it. This is the opinion of the Ritva, but there is another opinion in the Ritva himself that he says this is not so. But the opinion of the Minchas Chinuch is that when the Dalet Hanesim were established, Al Pi the Navi Zechariah, Tzayim HaRavi, Tzayim HaChamishi, Tzayim HaShviv, Tzayim HaSiri, the Navi only legislated the month. The Navi said fast B'Ravi in the month of Tammuz, B'Chamishi in the month of Av, B'Shvi in the month of Tishrei, B'Asiri in the month of Teves. But clearly Zechariah never said what day to fast, and therefore the Minchas Chinuch suggests that in terms of what day to fast, you could fast any day during that month. So, but what's that going to look like? Some people are going to fast on the 9th and the 8th and the 5th and the 3rd and the 2nd. Later on, the Rabbanon legislated which day of the month to fast. But the day of the month was not a legislation of the prophet. It was a legislation of the Rabbanon later. However, before the Rabbanon legislated, it was up to each and every individual to decide what day to fast particularly. So coming back to some of the questions, let's start with the following. We know that they used to fast in the times of the first Beis HaMikdash. After the first Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, what day did they used to fast in Tammuz? They fasted on the 9th. So we asked, well, if the Navi legislated to fast on the 9th, how are we authorized to change it to the 17th? The answer is the Navi never legislated to fast on the 9th. The Navi legislated to fast on Tammuz. Conveniently, in the time that they broke the walls in the times of the second Beis HaMikdash, it happened during that month. So since it conveniently happened during that month, we're able to change it to a later date, because Chachamim could argue on Chachamim, could manipulate what the Chachamim say. So you'll ask, but Ein Bezdin Yachal Avatel Divrei Bezdin Chaveram Kim Gadol Mena B'Chachma V'Minyan. I believe Tosfos says in Masechta Megillah that to change a date from one to another, that's not called being Mavatel. That's just moving it. Okay. Be it as it may, that's Pshat and how they moved it from the 9th of Tammuz to the 17th of Tammuz. We move on. What's Pshat Rabbi Yochanan? What?
By moving it, you're Mavatel.
Okay, it's debatable, but Tosfos does say that just changing a date, you're not being oiker the date. You're just sliding it down a little bit later in the month.
You fast the day after Yom Kippur. Did you fast in Kippur?
No, that's a Doraisa.
It's not
Okay, but you can learn the sport of it.
You could also say that the Rabbanon, even when they made the 9th, they didn't say it has to be the 9th. They said, for now it's the 9th. Because now it's the most, now this is the date that resonates with the people. Okay, let's move on. Rabbi Yochanan says, if I would have been there, I would have made Tisha B'Av on the 10th. So we asked Rabbi Yochanan, we wouldn't have asked your opinion, we wouldn't have cared what you said. Because you can't argue on the Navi. The Navi said Tisha B'Av. No, the answer is, says the Minchas Chinuch, the Navi didn't say Tisha B'Av. The Navi said Av. The Chachamim made it the 9th. Rabbi Yochanan says, excuse you me, I'm also a rabbi. If I would have been there, I would have disagreed with those Rabbanim, and I would have legislated it on the 10th. And the question we ask, there's this whole machlokes, what's the fast of Teves? Is it the 5th, like Rav Shimon Bar Yochai? Is it the 10th, like Rabbi Akiva? Puk chazi ma'amadaber. Why don't we go see what people are doing? The answer is what people are doing. They're doing everything under the sun. One guy's doing the 2nd, one guy's doing the 3rd, one guy's doing the 4th. It's, it depends on your work schedule. It depends on, I'm off every 3rd Wednesday of the month, so I'll do Wednesday. This guy can't fast on Tuesdays. Whatever it is, everybody had their own schedule. It wasn't legislated until much later. So you can't say, go look to see what the people are doing.
No Kriyas Torah.
Oh, you mean, what did they do with Vayichal?
Yeah.
I don't know. Marv Rabboisai, let's come back to the Avodraham. But first, let's answer the question that we started with. The question we started with, we asked, and as I mentioned, this question that bothered me for many years, Miman of Shach, what's worse, Bayis Rishon or Bayis Sheni? Clearly, Bayis Sheni is more Chomer. We fast on the 17th of Tammuz and not the 9th. So why do we fast the day they surrounded the walls by Bayis Rishon? Why don't we fast the day they surrounded the walls by Bayis Sheni? So the truth is, I found a few things. I would venture to say, a novel approach, by the way, this is like not unconnected to the Shiur. I want to say an original approach, why we don't fast the day they surrounded the walls by Bayis Sheni. And let's ask further, why do you think they didn't know what date they surrounded the walls by Bayis Sheni? Like, how's that possible? From Bayis Rishon, we remember the date. And Bayis Sheni, we don't remember the date? So maybe we could suggest as follows. Do you remember the Gemara in Gittin, I think Daf Nun Vav? That the Gemara says there were these three wealthy people in Yerushalayim, Nakdimon ben Gurion, ben Tzitzis HaKeses, Kalba Savua, and they said, we're going to take care of Yerushalayim. One said, I'm going to give the salt and the wine and the grain and the wood. And the Gemara says there was enough to last for how many years?
21 years.
22 years, right? Right? So for a very long time, I think 22 years. And so what happened? The Bar Yoinim said, no, this is not, we don't play these games, we don't play politics, we're going to go fight them, and they burnt down the storehouses. So I ask you a question. Do you think the day they surrounded the walls of Yerushalayim, when Yerushalayim could have withstood it for 22 years, do you think that was a very tragic day? I don't know. I mean, if your city is under siege, but you're not going to feel the effects of it for 22 years, a lot of things could happen in 22 years. Maybe we could suggest that the reason we don't fast the day they surround Yerushalayim by Bayis Sheni, because the day they surround the walls in Bayis Sheni, it wasn't a tragedy. By Bayis Rishon, the people were poor and they had no food. So when they surrounded it, it meant their death. Bayis Sheni, maybe we don't know the date because it was never of note. It only became of note when the Bar Yoinim burnt down the storehouses. But maybe the day they surrounded wasn't a big deal. It became a big deal when the Bar Yoinim took over. That's just a suggestion. But I did find in the Shas HaTshuva's Binyan Shloimeh that he says, we don't know what date they surrounded the walls by Bayis Sheni. It was a very tumultuous time, and there were a lot of tsaras, so it was forgotten. Okay. I would say im Kabbalah hi nekabel, if that's im Kabbalah hi nekabel, if that's in fact the case. You know, the Binyan Shloimeh is a late achroin, but it is a sort of a metzia and a nugget that we found, that he says that the days that he says v'av shelo yadu eza yom shesamach Yerushalayim. Okay. But based on this Shiur, we could give a third answer. So in other words, we've given two answers so far. Number one, we don't fast the day they surrounded by Bayis Sheni because it was not a tragic. Number two, we didn't know. But number three, and more importantly, the Tashbeit says this Yisoid, that the Navi never legislates the date, the Navi legislates the month. So when it comes to the breaching of the walls of Yerushalayim, in the times of the second Beis HaMikdash, conveniently they breached it the same month. So since they breached it the same month, we could slide it from the 9th to the 17th. But in the times of the second Beis HaMikdash, it probably happened a different month. If it happened a different month, you can't change it. Now what month is it? Well, once we couldn't change it, so it was forgotten. In other words, once we couldn't use it, so it was not of note, and therefore it was lost. But that's the answer that the Tashbeit gives. Marvar Aboisai comes the Sefer Oiros HaShabbos, written by Reb Shlomo Warman, Zechatzak Bracha, who lived here in this neighborhood. It was a Rosh Yeshiva of Hebrew Academy of Nassau County. He was a Talmud of Lazer Silver. I had the chus to hear this answer from him, and later I found it in Chidushay Hagrach, Reb Chaim Brisker. Okay, Reb Chaim Soloveitchik says the same answer. It's mamish a gorgeous answer. Let's come back first to answer the first kasha of the Minchas Chinuch. The Minchas Chinuch asks, wait a second, why do we push off Tanisim that come on Shabbos? The Navi Yeshaya says, Esk isn't a hate. Karasla Shabbos Oineg. The Navi Zechariah says, fast. Tzayim Revi, Tzayim Chamishi. So he asks, Sheva Tasa. So why does Yeshaya beat Zechariah and we eat and we push off the tightness? No, they should clash and we should do Sheva Tasa and fast. What's the answer? The answer is, Zechariah never said to fast when Tisha B'Av comes out on Shabbos. Zechariah never told you to fast any day of the month. Zechariah says fast this month. So this day I can't fast. So the Rabbanon said to fast. You have the Rabbanon said to fast on this day. But the Navi Yeshaya says to eat, and Yeshaya is stronger than the Chachamim. So therefore we have to push it off. Comes Rabbi Warman, and again this is Reb Chaim Brisker, and he says, When could we answer the Minchas Chinuch's kasha that the day of the month was not legislated, only the month, and therefore we have to push off a tainus? That's when it comes to Tisha B'Av. That's when it comes to Tzom Gedalia. That's when it comes to Shavas B'Tammuz. There it's Tzom HaRavi, Tzom HaShavi, Tzom HaChamishi. But when it comes to the fast of Asara B'Teves, we have another Navi who comes into the boxing ring. We have the Navi Yecheskel. By the way, who's Yecheskel? Yecheskel is always called Ben Adam, because he's a Gilgal of Cain. And Cain killed Hevel. Why? Because one twin girl was born with Cain, one twin girl was born with Hevel. So they had their shidduch. But an extra twin was born with Hevel. Es Achiv Es Havel. So Cain says, I'm the oldest, she belongs to me. Hevel says, she's born with me, she belongs to me. They fought over her. Cain killed Hevel. That's why in the Navi Yecheskel, to be Masakein for that, Yecheskel's wife dies. Hineni aloikech mimcha machmad einecha. You were choymed, this girl from Hevel. Einecha is gematria Cain. Okay, and so on and so forth, the Arizal says. But, be it as it may, the Navi Yecheskel says, Be'etzem hayoim hazeh. When it comes to Asar B'Teves, it's not a Gzeira Shavah. Etzem Hayom Hazeh. Etzem Hayom Hazeh. It says Etzem Hayom Hazeh by Yom Kippur. It says Etzem Hayom Hazeh Asar B'Teves. We're going to learn one from another. No, the Navi Yecheskel is saying that when it comes to Asar B'Teves, not only is the month legislated, the day is also legislated. The day is legislated. So if Asara B'Teves were to come out on Shabbos, so now the Navi Yecheskel says fast. The Navi Yeshaya says eat. What do you do when you have a clash between two Nevi'im? Sheval Tasa. That's Pshat in the Avudraham. Why, if Asar B'Teves would come out on Shabbos, you would fast. Why? All the other Tanaisim are only legislated by the month and not legislated by the day. Asar B'Teves is legislated on the day as well. If the day is legislated, then when you don't know what to do, where the Navi says fast, and the other Navi says es, so then Sheval Tasa Adif, that's Pshat in the Avudraham, says Reb Chaim. Let's end off, we're talking about Asar B'Teves, and I'm sure you know it, but let's just end off anyway with the famous words of the Chassam Sofer. The Chassam Sofer's Pshat in the Avudraham. Chassam Sofer is found in the Taras Moshe, Parshas Vayikra, Drush L'Zayin Adar, I believe in the Drushas as well. And that is, the Chassam Sofer tells us, there's another type of fast that we do fast on Shabbos. If somebody has yahrzeit on Shabbos, do you fast? No. Why do you not fast on Shabbos if you have yahrzeit? What are you going to do? The past is past. You can't cry over spilled milk, as they say. You're not allowed to fast on Shabbos if you're just crying over a tragedy that happened in the past. But there is one type of fast you're allowed to do on Shabbos. A bad dream. Right? The Gemara says in Tainis, Yafeh chaloim, Yafeh Tainis chaloim ke'esh b'noi eres. Fasting for a dream burns up the portent of the dream. Why are you not allowed to fast for a yahrzeit? You are allowed to fast for a dream. The answer is a yahrzeit, you're just fasting for a past tragedy. You can't do that on Shabbos. A dream, if you fast for the dream, it will burn up the dream, and it has a toyeles la'asad. So you're allowed to fast on Shabbos. Says the Chassam Sofer, that's the reason why, if Asar B'Teves would come out on Shabbos, you're allowed to fast on Shabbos. Why? Because all the other Tanaisim, the cycle of Churban had already begun. But Asar B'Teves, like you mentioned before, was the first step in the process of Churban. That's when Nebuchadnezzar surrounded the wall. We know in Judaism, in Yiddishkeit, the calendar is a living calendar, which means that it's Shachiyanu v'kimanu v'yan lazaman hazeh. Every year when we get to a certain calendar date, it's not that we're commemorating what happened, but so to speak, it is reenacted. It occurs again, so to speak. Every Pesach, Hashem takes us out of Egypt. Every Asar B'Teves, which is the beginning of the process, God convenes the Bezin Shamala, and He determines, is there going to be a cycle of Churban this year? Is there going to be a Tisha B'Av this year? Is there going to be a Shavas B'Tammuz this year? Is there going to be Dalet Tanaisim this year? Since Asar B'Teves is the beginning of the process, the Rebbeinu Shalom convening the Bezdin Shamala, says Chassam Sofer, B'chol dar v'dar. Yoshvin Bezdin, number 22, toward the end, V'goizvin ha'chorbo shel kol shana v'shana. And this And this is what happens on Asar B'Teves. So therefore, on Asar B'Teves, fasting is not only over spilled milk, but fasting actually is able to rectify for the future and possibly prevent a new cycle of Churban. So just like one is allowed to fast for a bad dream on Shabbos, because it has a toyelas for the future, likewise one is able to fast on Asar B'Teves that comes out on Shabbos. Chassam Sofer says this concept is rooted in the writings of Rab Shamshin Me'ashtapoli in the Sefer Karnayim, in his commentary called Don Yadin. And Chodesh Teves, it's analogous not to Yom Shemes V'Yava V'Imai, but rather to a Tainas Chalon. So we hope, B'Siyata Shmaya, by our fasting on the Tzoim HaAsiri, the Yibon Sham should end the cycle of Churban, and we should be Zoicha, that Tzoim HaRavi, the Tzoim HaChamishi, Tzoim HaShvi, the Tzoim HaAsiri, Yia, Lebeis Yehuda, L'Sasan, L'Simcha, U'Lamayadim, Toivim, V'Ha'emes, V'Ha'Shalom, Ehavu. Shkaya.
From new mouth, we got here.
Amen.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.